Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good part of day, everyone. Welcome to the largest, fastest growing, and the most active uh, community, global community for organizational design, products centricity, and business agility, aka large scale Scrum. Today, we have two special guests that are business partners and trustworthy colleagues, Suzanne Morrison and Vinny Gill. Just a few words about each. Suzanne is an experienced agile coach, trainer, and facilitator who helps product and delivery leaders overcome challenges that impact team performance, delivery speed, product success, etc. With more than 25 years of experience across multiple sectors, from startup to global organizations, Suzanne specializes in creating environments where teams can strive, build psychological safety, increase collaboration, and align around clear outcomes. Vinny Gill, Suzanne's partner, um, works with leaders to solve real business problems that affect performance, culture, delivery, and profit. She partners with organizations to uncover root causes and apply system thinking, team dynamics, and lean and agile principles to create measurable, sustainable improvements. Vinny brings more than 25 years of global experience, having worked with over 100 teams and trained more than 1,000 professionals. She also holds a few unique credentials. She's a chartered fellow of the CIPD as an international speaker, co-founder of Outcome Over Output, and the chair of the Product Management Initiative for the Agile Alliance. So with that, and without any further ado, I would like to pass the baton over to our great guests. Suzanne and Vinny, please take it away.
Thank you,
Thank
Jean.
you.
I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that okay.
Looks great.
Yep, great. So, hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's very nice to see a few familiar faces. My name is Vinny.
And I'm Suzanne. And I'm just going to start by telling you a little bit about us. Thank you already, Jean, for the introduction. So Vinny and I have been fortunate enough over the years to work for lots of different types and different sizes of organisation. And one of the things that we love doing is helping teams and organisations to improve, especially when they're in these really complex, messy environments. And that's why we formed our company together, Outcome Over Output. We've put our LinkedIn QR codes there as well, so we always welcome people to connect. And if you've got any questions after the session's over, we always welcome that as well. But I'm going to pass you over to Vinny to tell you a bit more about what to expect.
Thank you, Suzanne. Now I'm going to tell you a story, so I hope that you sit back, relax, and take the story in. So once upon a time, in the not so distant past, and the story happens in the Southern Hemisphere, I was part of a large program team, and we kept overrunning our budget. Sounds familiar, right? We tried everything from freezing hiring to even stopping travel to our different offices and even to our suppliers. Meanwhile, our customers were not happy. Our product was extremely buggy, and we thought that the testers could not test fast enough. So we went to all the other teams and we took their testers instead. People were tired and unhappy. And if you find yourself nodding in the story, then you are in the right place. Today, we're going to talk to you about continuous improvement, specifically in the context of complex adaptive systems. Now, don't worry if you're not sure what a complex adaptive system is, because by the end of this talk, you'll realize that we are all part of several complex adaptive systems. And then we'll move on to theory of constraints, and also known as talk. Now, one of the tools in theory of constraints is current reality trees. Now, you're probably wondering, what on earth is current reality trees, Vinny? Well, it's quite simply a visual representation, and it helps you map up the cause and effect relationship of your problems and your challenges that you face at your workplace, or even you can use this tool in your personal life as well. It helps you identify the root cause or the root causes so that you are solving the right problem, not like in my story before, where we were just scurrying, doing anything and everything. I find as agilists, we're always telling people, don't use a framework. A framework is not going to solve your problems. But somehow along the line, I feel that we forget to communicate the how. And that's where current reality trees comes in. We use it, it works, we're passionate about it, and we want to share it with you today. And then we'll move on to share some practical tips because along the way, Suzanne and I made a lot of mistakes. So we'll share that with you so that you have the confidence to try this tool after our talk. Now, before we begin, we feel that it's really helpful to set the stage. What is continuous improvement in complex adaptive systems? Now, for this part, I invite you to take out your phones. And if you would join me in the Slido, if you'd scan the Slido, we're very curious. What techniques have your team or organization used to improve? I'm not sure if everybody managed to scan the code on time. Thank you. Someone's popped the code in the chat. Might
Sorry
just
about that. I'm too quick at
yeah.
the screens. I'll let you have a chance to do that as well.
And you can pop in as many answers of suggestions or answers or any as many techniques that you have tried.
Just laughing at the free lunch.
I've never heard Microsoft Planner before, but that's good. Let us know if you still need to scan the code or the QR code. Let us know. Yep. Okay. What do you think, Suzanne?
I think normally when we do this poll, retrospectives is always one that comes out really strongly in this. But yeah, free
Absolutely.
lunch is always a good idea as well.
Yeah. Okay. So we always find that it's helpful to have several continuous improvement techniques in your toolkit because we are not a believer that one size fits all. Now, you have probably used some of this or maybe all of this. The first one is plan, do, study, act. That's the good old Deming cycle, right? Deming actually later changed. It was originally plan, do, check, and act. And he changed it to study and act, which I personally resonate with because most of the time we plan and do, but we forget to go back and study what has happened or what the effects are, sort of the continuous improvement, close back the loop, right? And then if you're not doing any of these, visualizing work is one of the best places that I would personally start. It's something quite powerful that just making your work visual, it helps you just identify the bottlenecks. Retrospectives, I know that was the winner. It's a great tool, but there are problems with retrospectives, and Suzanne will cover this later on. Experimentation, framing something as an experimentation, framing a change as an experimentation, it can just seem less daunting. And then there's pair programming. Of course, the term is an IT term for pair programming, but we feel that it's also helpful where to just pair with somebody and talk to somebody and just work together. Suzanne and I do that quite often. And lastly, we have theory of constraints, which is especially helpful in complex adaptive systems. Now, this slide is going to help us all put our talk today into context because we're aware that there's so many new terminologies that we're going to use. So if you look at current reality trees, it's just a wee piece of puzzle right in the middle. It's just a very small piece of something that's a lot bigger. We're barely scratching the surface today, but I feel it's just enough to get you all excited. Now, we promise you animals, didn't we, Suzanne?
It does indeed.
Yes, and
Um,
Suzanne's got
so
the first one up.
yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about what we mean by a complex adaptive system. So I'm just going to play a short clip of this video to give you a demonstration of this from nature. So I don't know if any of you have come across this before. If you're not familiar with it, this is called a murmuration. So it's a murmuration of starlings. And I think they're a really great example of a complex adaptive system. If you're not familiar with complex adaptive systems, I'm just going to break it down for you. So we'll start off with a system. What do we mean by a system? So a system is simply a set of parts that interconnect to achieve a particular purpose. So the starlings are a really great example of that. The individual parts are the birds, and they're coming together to achieve that purpose of migration or finding food or social activity. Another example of a system is a car. So in a car, we've got all these different parts. In our engine, we've got different parts, and they are coming together to achieve that purpose of helping us get from A to B. And then if we build on that and we add on complex, what do we mean by a complex system? So complex is when we can't predict the behavior of the whole system by looking at the individual parts. So the starlings, again, are a really good example of this. There's no way that you could look at one of the birds and then work out what shape the murmurations were going to be in. On the other hand, a car isn't an example of a complex system because as long as you've got somebody who understands the engine and how everything fits together, then you'll be able to predict what's going to happen. So the car is actually an example of a complicated system rather than a complex system. And then if we add on adaptive to that, so adaptive is just as it sounds, it means that the system can actually change its behavior according to the environment. So for example, with the starlings, if a predator came into sight, like a hawk, you'd see these starlings change their shape rapidly to protect themselves from that predator. And one example of a complex adaptive system that I'm sure you're all familiar with is our organizations and our teams that we work in. And the COVID and the pandemic was a really good example of how companies adapted during that time period. And here's a few more examples. So we said, even if you don't know what this is, you definitely interact and are part of these complex adaptive systems in nature and in our kind of day-to-day lives as well. And one of the examples I really like is the human body, because it's actually a system of systems. So we've got things like the digestive system, the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, all working together to help us to stay alive. So that's just a few examples there. So I want to go back to retrospectives. It came up in the poll, and it's one of the most common ways to help us improve with agile ways of working. I love retrospectives, and if I'm ever working with a team who are new to agile, it's probably one of the first things I start with, and to see improvements over time. But we do sometimes experience challenges with retrospectives, and you might have experienced some of these yourself. So one is the things that come up in our discussions in retrospectives. If they're within our control, then we can obviously come up with improvements and try to address these issues. But quite often we come up with things that we can't control. There may be things we can influence, like maybe we've got dependencies on other teams. We can't control their behavior, but we could influence them. Or there might be things that are completely out with our control. So if you're finding that in your retrospective, you've got a lot of these things that are coming up that are out with your control, that might be a kind of hint that you might need some additional tools in your toolbox to help cope with this. Another problem that I see often is these sticking plaster solutions. So I don't know if you've ever been in a retrospective and in the last 5 or 10 minutes, you're in a rush to try to find some quick solution to a problem that's been discussed. And quite often we come up with something, but it doesn't actually address the underlying root cause of the problem. It might have a bit of an improvement, but it doesn't actually fix the problem. So I would recommend if you are seeing this type of thing in your retrospectives, adding another tool like theory of constraints into your toolbox can be really helpful. So I want to tell you just a little bit about theory of constraints and what it is before we go into talking about current reality trees. So I'll tell you a bit of a story about how I came across this. So if I go back, way back to 2012, I was working at Skyscanner, which, if you're not familiar, is a travel search company based in Scotland. And I was fortunate enough when I started, it was a very small size. It was just over 100 people. And then when I left 7 years later, it had grown to about 1,500 people across 10 different offices. So, one of the things that we found is during this fast growth period, we actually found that things that worked really well for us would stop working. Um, so, we used theory of constraints a lot to try to help us navigate that change and that fast growth. One of the things that always sticks in my mind was the release process that we had at Skyscanner. It took about 6 weeks for us to do a release of the website, and we had that release scheduled every 6 weeks. It was full of drama. There was always problems. There was dozens of people working on it and a full-time project manager to coordinate it all as well. And our chief operating officer was getting a bit fed up with this, and he'd been inspired by a book called The Goal, which you might have come across before, by Eli Goldratt. And he'd been reading about this and reading about how finding the constraint in your system and addressing that could help to improve your overall throughput. So he actually gave all the engineers in the company a copy of this book, told them to go home, not come back until they'd read it, and we put a stop to all the new releases to the website apart from critical fixes. And when we came back, we actually had that time and that space to try to map out our whole release process, to understand where the constraint was, to take time to implement the continuous integration and continuous delivery. And by the time I left Skyscanner, the teams were releasing on a daily basis. Every time they had something ready, it would be out to production. It wasn't as much drama. It wasn't as much of a big event. And that was, mainly in thanks to us using the theory of constraints to help us with this. But I'm going to let Vinny now tell you about the tool that we'll be talking about for the rest of this session, which is one of the lesser known tools from the theory of constraints.
Thank you. Well, what you see is a visual representation that is mapping the cause and effect chain of a problem or a challenge that you're facing in a workplace, right? So this is a simple representation. At the top, you will find something that is called an undesirable effect. Now, what you do at the top when you're at the undesirable effect, you keep asking why, similar to the 5 why theories that we use in Lean. And you keep going why, until you arrive at what's called the intermediate effects. And you keep going why, as you peel the layers of all the symptoms in your organization until you arrive at one or more root causes. Now, when you arrive at this root cause, it will then help you answer, why is our system failing to meet our expectations? Now, as I said, this is a simple structure of a current reality tree. In reality, trees are pretty complex. Now, here are some real life examples of current reality trees that we have built. Now, as you can see, you don't need any fancy tools. All you need is a good old Sharpie and some sticky notes and a whiteboard. But you can also use digital tools such as Lucid, Miro, or Neural. right? So don't complicate things. Suzanne has actually blurred out the post-its to not air our dirty laundry of the clients that we have worked with. So we've used current reality trees for an array of different problems and challenges. So we've just compiled a few together to help you give you some ideas of where you might want to try using the current reality trees. Suzanne spoke about Skyscanner. You can also use it for organizational cultural issues. You can also maybe use it to get management or leadership to buy in to invest in addressing technical depth, because that's something that's always overlooked because we always want things fast and we forget to look at the tech depth. You can use it to improve the recruitment process. And this is one of my favorites, an OKR process that didn't go as planned. You can also use it to actually find out why didn't that rollout go as planned. AI implementation, big topic at the moment, right? It's really important that before you layer AI, and everybody knows this, if your systems and processes are not great and you have problems, layering AI on top of a broken process or something that's not working well, it just ends up being a catastrophe. Okay, so I know that you're all getting excited and you're all waiting to build a current reality tree. And we actually did promise you some parachuting cats, didn't we, Suzanne?
We did.
Yeah, but I think not quite yet, not quite yet. I feel that it's really important before we meet our lovely parachuting cats. It's important to clarify the structure of a tree, in particular, the first undesirable effect, because when we watch this video, you're going to need to identify the undesirable effect. Now, the undesirable effect, it sits right at the top. It's the top structure of any tree. And what it's telling you is basically it's the first indication that something is amiss in the system. It is something that exists, it's really happening, and it's negative in its own merits. So let's just recap. It is something that is happening now. It's not something that has happened later or in the past or something that you feel that might happen. And this is really important because as human beings, we're often, and it's possible that we're influenced by something that has happened in the past that we feel that it's going to happen now. Okay? So the other thing that I want to share with you is how to pronounce an undesirable effect. It's quite simply pronounced as UDI. So if you're in your mic and if you want to say it out, usually if we do it in live conference, we get people to say it out. It's UDI, so it's more of an O sound. So what we find is typically when Suzanne and I do our one-on-ones or our retrospectives, people don't actually identify the undesirable effect first. And I'll show you a little example. Suzanne, can you tell me what's currently frustrating you at work?
Well, when I'm speaking to people, quite often something that comes up in the conversation is that people are complaining that they've got too many meetings. I don't know if anyone else sometimes experiences that.
Well, Suzanne, so this is what you do. You say, well, Suzanne, what is the impact of having too many meetings?
I think it would mean I'm going to be context switching a lot, multitasking, maybe getting a bit frustrated.
Okay. And what do you think is the impact of that too much context switching?
It's probably going to mean slower delivery. So maybe not meeting deadlines that I've got set. I might actually start to feel like disengaged as well, if I'm not getting the time to spend on my work because of the meetings.
Yeah. So what you're doing is you keep going up and up by asking, what is the impact? What is the impact? What is the impact? Until that you feel that you can't go any more further. Okay? So that's how you identify your undesirable effect. And I know that we promise you parachuting cats. Well, Suzanne?
Yeah, so we are going to play you a short video And I just invite you to sit back and relax. And as you're watching this video, see if you can identify the undesirable effects in the video. And you might just want to take a note of them if you spot any.
In the 1950s, the Dayak people of Borneo, an island in Southeast Asia, were suffering from an outbreak of malaria, so they called the World Health Organization for help. The World Health Organization had a ready-made solution, which was to spray copious amounts of DDT around the island. With the application of DDT, the mosquitoes that carried the malaria were knocked down, and so was the malaria. There were some interesting side effects, though. The first was that the roofs of people's houses began to collapse on their heads. Turns out the DDT not only killed off the malaria-carrying mosquitoes, but it also killed a species of parasitic wasp that had controlled a population of thatch-eating caterpillars. Thatch being what the roofs of the Dayak people's homes were made from. Without the wasps, the caterpillars multiplied and flourished and began munching their way through the villagers' roofs. That was just the beginning. The DDT affected a lot of the island's other insects, which were eaten by the resident population of small lizards called geckos. The biological half-life of DDT is around 8 years, so animals like geckos do not metabolize it very fast. It stays in their system for a long time. Over time, the geckos began to accumulate pretty high levels of DDT, and while they tolerated the DDT fairly well, the island's resident cats, which dined on the geckos, did not. The cats ate the geckos, and the DDT contained in the geckos killed the cats. With the cats gone, the island's population of rats came out to play. We all know what happens when rats multiply and flourish. Pretty soon the Dayak people were back on the phone to the World Health Organization, only this time it wasn't malaria that was the problem. It was the plague and the destruction of their grain stores, both of which were caused by the overpopulation of rats. This time though, the World Health Organization didn't have a ready-made solution and had to invent one. What did they do? They decided to parachute live cats into Borneo. Operation Cat Drop occurred courtesy of the Royal Air Force and eventually stabilized the situation.
Hope you all enjoyed the video. And we've actually got another little poll for you. This is an anonymous poll. And it's at the same QR code as we were at before, but if you haven't got it, the QR code's there as well. So what we'd like you to do is just share, what did you think the undesirable effects were in Operation Cat Drop? And there might be more than one, so just feel free to go onto that Slido poll and just select any of the ones that you think are undesirable effects. I'll give you all a minute or so to have a look at that, and then I'll share the results.
I just want to check in if you're able to vote.
It says voting is closed on my end.
Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can fix that.
Mine is still scanning. Slido.
Yeah, I think something's gone wrong with Slido.
Yeah.
Somehow it has closed my voting. So I don't know if we can if invite people if you want to pop anything in the chat, if there's any undesirable effects that you spot, or feel free to shout them out if you prefer to do that. So we've
Rats,
got
rats, rats.
rats, 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 all of them, including lack of
Rats,
shelter
rats, rats.
due to roof collapse.
Who are
Anyone
you?
else?
Who are you, Agile Coach? I'm very curious what your name is.
Anyone else?
Ah, hi, Rohit.
So what I'll show you then is Vinny and I have built a current reality tree for Operation Cat Drop. So we're just going to take you through it step by step, and we're going to start with the things that we've identified as undesirable effects. So we came up with two undesirable effects from this story. So one of them was around people not having sufficient shelter, and the other one was about people dying from the plague. So there was quite a lot of other possible choices in that poll. But with most of them, if you say what is the impact of that, you'll get to something higher up. I think we could probably say what's the impact of people not having sufficient shelter and get somewhere further up than that. But because we don't know that from the video, I've just stopped there for the purposes of this. So that's our two UDIs.
Yeah. So, Suzanne, how do I know that these are my undesirable effects?
So there's a few things that you can check. So the first thing is just double check that you have written something that's negative. So it should always be something that's negative. You should also check, is it happening right now? So obviously this was happening back in the 50s, so the answer here is no, but I hope you'll forgive us for using that historical example. But if you were doing this in your team or in your organisation, you just do that check to make sure it's happening right now. And then also just asking what is the impact of that? Because as we talked about earlier, when you have conversations with people and you ask them what's frustrating them, they usually identify intermediate effects, and you can usually ask them that question to get higher up in the tree. But don't get analysis paralysis. I think the main thing is that at the top of the tree, you've got negative things that are happening right now and things that resonate with people that they recognize in their system.
So, Suzanne, now that I have my undesirable effects, what do I do next?
So the next step is to start to build your tree by identifying the intermediate effects. And I'm sure a lot of you here are familiar with 5 whys. I saw somebody's put a link to it in the chat as well. So it's very similar to that process that you use with 5 whys. So you're just starting to ask why, you're starting to ask what else. So I'll give you an example here. So if we take one of our UDIs, many people do not have sufficient shelter. Why is that? So it's because the roofs of the houses are collapsing, and also people are too ill to repair the houses. Why are the roofs of the houses collapsing? It's because they're being destroyed by caterpillars. Why are they being destroyed by caterpillars? It's because straw roofs are a good source of food for caterpillars, and the caterpillar population is growing. So hopefully you get the idea here. You're asking why, you're asking what else. Usually what I like to do is I'll start with one of the undesirable effects and I'll work my way down as far as I can go, and then I'll go to the next one. But there's no hard and fast rule as to how you do it. And if you're familiar with 5 whys, you'll probably find it quite natural to do this.
Hmm. So, Suzanne, I see there's a few different post-it colors. What have you done there?
Yeah, so this isn't anything official from the theory of constraints, but over the years when I've been using this, especially if I've been using sticky notes and boards like Miro, I've found it quite useful to color code things. So what I do is I color code my UDIs in orange, I'll color code my intermediate effects in yellow, and then I'll color code the root causes in red. And you might notice some green sticky notes there, and I like to refer to them as facts of life. So these are things that are part of your tree, but they're not going to be things that you can change. So, for example, straw roofs are a good source of food for caterpillars. Fleas like to bite people. There's not anything you can do about that. And similarly, in your organisation, you'll have some of these things, and having them in a different colour just helps to remind you that you don't want to go asking why down that particular branch, because you're not going to be able to actually make any changes there.
Yeah, so aside from the post-it notes and colors, I see a couple of circles around there.
Yeah, so that's, you'll notice
Why
like
have you done that?
yeah, that's like an ellipse. So you'll see that on a couple of the arrows, and what that signifies is a logical and. So I'll give you an example again. So when we look at the people don't have sufficient shelter and we ask why, it's because the roofs of the houses are collapsing and people are too ill to actually repair the roofs. And it's quite powerful to show that logical and, because if you can just remove one of these causes, then you'll also take away the effect above it. So if people weren't too ill to repair the houses, then there wouldn't be a problem, they'd repair the houses. So it's a really nice way just to show on your tree where there's that logical and that can help you when you're trying to resolve the issues, and it's quite powerful there.
Okay, great. So now we have our intermediate effects. What's step 3 then?
So I would, at this point, just continue to ask why until you get down to your root cause. So you might end up with one root cause, or you might end up with multiple root causes. Now, in this particular example, Vinny and I felt that the root cause here was that the World Health Organization had that policy of using DDT to address malaria. And quite often you will find that in a tree in your organisation, that the root cause can be a policy. So obviously to address that root cause, we'd have to start thinking about how could we change that policy so that it didn't happen in the future. So that's kind of what I would recommend doing at that point.
Are there any tips that you can share
Yeah, a
that
lot of
so that we
people,
know that, we're actually at our root cause?
yeah, a lot of people ask me, how do you know when to stop? Because you
Hmm.
could just keep asking why till you get to the creation of the earth or something like that. So I recommend at the point where you actually go to something that is not within your control, that would be a good point to stop at the step before that, because it's going to be very difficult to actually use the tree and to address the root causes if you've got things that are completely out with the control of your organization. So that's kind of a good sign that you've gone too far at that point, I would say.
Okay. And I
And
believe we
then,
have one final step, which is very important.
yeah, so this is known as the validation of the tree. So this is, very important, similar to testing when we're writing software. And to validate a tree, it's very simple. You want to read it out loud. I often find if I've been, piecing together a current reality tree in my head, it looks fine. But as soon as I start to read it out and explain it to somebody, I find logical errors. So I'd actually recommend reading it from the top to the bottom and also from the bottom to the top. So if you were reading it from top to bottom, you would be saying the cause of this was, the cause of this was, and working your way down. If you were reading it from bottom to top, you would be saying the impact of this is, the impact of this is. And just reading that out together in a group is so powerful. It can help you spot logical errors. It can also help you spot where something isn't actually causation, it's just correlation, or it can help you also spot insufficiency. You've not got everything in that tree. So really great tip for when you've finished creating your tree. So this is just a very simplified picture of the anatomy of a current reality tree. And as Vinny showed you earlier, in real life, your trees are probably going to have many more layers and be much wider. But in summary, at the top, you've got your undesirable effects, your goodies. So these are your kind of negative things that are happening right now. And then you'll have several layers of intermediate effects. You'll notice the arrows are all pointing up the way. And then you may use your kind of ellipse to indicate logical ands in there as well. And then finally, you'll get down to your root cause. And there is some other symbology that you can use as well within the current reality tree, but these are the kind of main things to think about, especially when you're starting off. And we just want to finish off by giving you a few tips. It was many years ago that I started to build current reality trees. And when I first started it, I, to be honest, didn't have a clue what I was doing. I'd read one of the Eli Goldratt books, which didn't really explain how to do it. So there was a lot of trial and error. So we just want to share a few things so that if you want to use this technique, then hopefully you'll get a head start. So the first few are, first of all, I think it can be really good to start small. So when I first built a tree, I had about a dozen people in a room for over a week. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of debating, things took a long time. And it's also very expensive in terms of time for the organisation as well. So I refined the technique over time, and now I find it's really helpful to have small group discussions and even just one-to-ones where I'm asking people to share what frustrates them. I'm taking notes, I'm starting to try to wire up the tree at that point. And then we can always come together as a full group once I've built the tree, just to review it together and to validate it. I also think it's so important to use language without blame if you're facilitating building a tree. And because we're talking about negative things that are happening, it's really common people will blame themselves. So as a facilitator, just making sure you're framing your questions in a way that you're not asking whose fault it is. And also reassuring people as well if they think it is their fault. Usually with systems thinking, it's the various interactions of different parts of a system that cause the problems, not one individual. And then my final one is to look for themes. If somebody says something, that could be quite interesting. But if three people all say the same thing, that's probably likely that that thing is actually happening. So I kind of try to get that triangulation, get three people to give that evidence before I'm putting it into the tree as well.
And now I have some learnings as well to share with you. It's really important that you get leadership buy-in, but not only leadership as well. It's really important that everybody knows what's happening and what's going on. Be open, honest, and transparent. Never do change in secret. Always do change with people and not to people. Suzanne once built an unsolicited tree, and it definitely did not go down well. Now, the next one that I want to share with you is don't agonize over being perfect or trying to get it right the first time. I can guarantee you, you will not get it right the first time, and neither did we. We didn't get it right for the first few times, and it really does take a lot of practice. So be gentle with yourself. And do validate the tree. I know sometimes people say, when you have a problem or you're trying to decide between two things, write everything down, make a list. Well, similar to this, you really need to read it out aloud. It's so important that when you hear yourself, I read it out to a friend. If you can't find a friend, read it aloud. But I personally prefer to read it to somebody else because then you can actually hear yourself and then you can hear yourself to say, does this really make sense? So that's some of the tips. And I feel at this part, like I need to provide a public service announcement, like a PSA. I feel like we all go for talks and, conferences and we come to meetups, but it's only as good as if you try it. And if you can't find anywhere to try it, you can start with your team, just with the team that you work in. Or you could also try this as at home. We've seen people that have tried it at home. I've tried it at home as well. And if you're from Europe or you're living in Europe, you will know now we are facing huge problems with our entry-exit system between EU and non-EU. And I've also tried to map out the root cause of this problem that we're facing.
Just to add a final tip to what Vinny said, if you're a bit nervous about building a tree for the first time with a group, what I like to do to practice is just, do it by myself in a notepad and just practice building it. And it can help me make sense of things as well. If I'm hearing lots of frustrations from people or I've been at some retrospectives, just drawing it into a bit of paper can really help me to get practice at doing that so that I'm more confident then to do that with a group. And I just want to finish off by sharing our cheat sheet. So this is something that you'll be able to download. And it's just really to help you get started with current reality trees. So it's got a little bit there about the benefits of them. We've got the anatomy of a tree, and then also a quick guide to help you build the current reality tree. You'll see in the bottom right corner, there's a QR code. If you scan the QR code, you'll go to a page on our website, and down the bottom of that page, you'll find a link to our slides, and you'll also find a link to this cheat sheet as well. Now, we have a training course, a video training course on Udemy that's much more in depth than the talk that we just gave. So it goes into much more detail about how to build a tree, the preparation beforehand, something called a future reality tree, which is what you do to address the root causes and test out your changes. And we also talk about experimentation in that course. We normally charge a fee for the course, but we're making it available for free for anybody who is on the talk today. And you can basically just scan that QR code and register for our newsletter, and you'll get a coupon code that you can use to get our course for free as well. I don't know if do you want to add anything to that, Vinny, to what I said there?
No, I think that's really good. I mean, we encourage you to actually the most important thing is to just try it. And if you have any questions while you're doing the course or anything, just feel free to always reach out to us.
Well, thank you so much for making this great presentation available to us, Suzanne and Vinny. Folks, we have I would say about 7, 8 minutes remaining in this on this call. So please just speak up and ask questions.
James Carpenter here. I had a question on what are your thoughts on when is it more appropriate to use a causal loop diagram versus a current reality tree? Because they're obviously very similar in some ways.
I have to say, I have not actually used a causal loop diagram. So, yeah, it'd probably be something I'd have to look at just to compare the differences between the two. And I know there are quite a few different tools you can use for this type of thing. You've got your 5 whys, you've got fishbone diagram, you've got causal loop. I usually find as well it's about finding something that works for you that you're comfortable with. So quite often there's a lot of commonality between these different tools, but I can't say specifically on causal loop. I don't know if any of you've used these at all.
I have actually used a causal loop diagram before, but somehow I prefer current reality trees because I feel with current reality trees, it just helps me build the tree that is just going from top to bottom. I can clearly organize myself. I found the times when I did do causal diagrams, the diagrams became quite big and quite messy with a lot of arrows. So I feel like it's more of a personal preference that you may want to do. I know I just went in circles back and forth, and it didn't really give me that clear visual representation that I needed, that what is my root cause. But it's not only about me. I find when I presented it to other people or presented it to leadership, it just, you're just able to focus in and zero in.
Thanks for the question, James, and thank you for the answer.
You're welcome.
Folks, anyone else wishes to this is, by the way, a great topic. We in large scale Scrum, we very heavy on system modeling and with causal loop diagrams. So that's a very relevant topic, I should say. There's a question from someone, Agile Coach is the screen name. How would you compare, I guess, referring to the CL causal loop diagram to the fishbone diagram, which is also another name for the fishbone is
Ishikawa.
Ikishawa. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have not used fishbone diagrams for a long, long time, but I think it was probably back in the early 2000s when I used one of these for the first time. And I kind of just found for me the current reality tree was more natural for me, and I preferred to use it and felt like I was able to get deeper with it as well.
I'm the same. I'm actually one of those people that actually studied. It was called total quality management back in university. So I have the formal education, you would say, about lean, but I know that knowledge doesn't equate competence. I have used the fishbone diagram. I personally find it's a good start. It's really good if you want to start somewhere. But for me, it was too simple, and I found it a bit more tricky to use in complex adaptive systems.
I'm actually, if you allow me, like 27 seconds to steal. The fishbone is not bad. It's just in a way it almost assumes that it's a linear cause and effect, and all of the causes fed into the same main line, like head of trunk, that leads to the problem. Whereas this causal loop diagram looks very organically on the entire ecosystem, and some of these upstream causes could be actually effects for other causes. So everything is related to
It is.
everything. It's like much more promiscuous, if you will,
Yeah.
opposed to linear.
Yeah. And I know with current reality trees, I often find as well, I'll have multiple undesirable effects, and the intermediate effects will start to join onto each other. And there is things in the current reality tree called negative reinforcing loops, and it's where you actually get a circle, and something then leads to another thing which makes that thing worse, and it kind of goes round in a circle. And then in the future reality tree, you have the opposite, the positive reinforcing loop. So you can start to see, if you were to look at the slide that has all of our examples, there are quite a lot of, circular arrows going around there and bits of the tree that are joined onto each other as well. So you really start to see how your system interconnects and how a lot of the problems that might have appeared to be separate are actually connected to each other as well.
I think one of the challenges with a causal loop diagram is all of the nodes are a system variable, and the links between them are the causal links. I have a feeling that the current reality tree is a little looser in that regard. So you still end up with these reinforcing loops and that sort of thing manifest itself. So in some ways, the CLD is harder because you have to think a little harder. But I think this might be easier at first to get the flow going. I don't know, but
yeah, I mean, I usually do find when I'm using this with people who've not used it before, they find it, once I've explained it and we start doing it together, it is easy to get started. But yeah, I have seen it get very, very complex and messy, especially if you're looking at a kind of wide organization problem and all the interconnections and the loops in there.
All right, folks, we will take probably one more short question answer if anyone wants to, because we need to wrap up in a few minutes. Anyone else wishes to speak up?
I think I've got just a quick understanding check, if I could.
Please.
As we were looking at those two, with the cat parachuting example, you had the two UDIs at the top. One was the roof and then the people dying. It would really, if I understand it, it would kind of depend on when you were doing the analysis, right? Which one of those you would address. If we were doing it right when people were dying, that's currently happening.
Yeah.
But people had died. We had done some things to try to resolve it and keep it from happening. But then something new happened. The roofs were collapsing, and now that was current. And so that I just want to make sure I'm understanding that that check at the end of, is this happening right now? Those two things were not happening at the same time, so we would have gone after the one that was happening right now.
So I would say in reality, when I've done this in an organization, we always have things at the top of the tree that are happening right now, but you might end up in your tree, if you go down into it, you may get to a past event that has then caused something that will start to be built into your causes. But yeah, because this was a historical example that we picked, just because it was a bit more interesting.
Sure.
It doesn't apply at all to that example, and you're right, it would be different points in time that you'd experience these
That would
things.
have, that probably would have found its way lower in the tree. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, folks, thank you
Steve.
so much for joining today. So I want to, before we wrap up, I want to give a personal shout out. Thank you very much to Suzanne and to Vinny for coming out of this, I guess, late hour for you folks, right? In Europe, it's getting late. And giving this great presentation. I want to thank you personally for contributing to the community. I want to also thank everyone who joined today. And what I would like to do is to make this recording and the materials available in the next few days. So please be on the lookout for the materials. I do encourage anyone to reach out to Vinny and to Suzanne personally directly. You don't need to go through me for full transparency. They both are available on LinkedIn for any of if you have any ideas you want to bounce around or any of their offerings, please reach out directly. Okay. Well,
Okay. And thank you to you, Jean, for inviting us.
my pleasure. I'm trying to give back to, every time I can. This is a great community to support.
Thanks, Jean.
Thank you. Have a
Nice to
great
meet
day. Have a great
Bye.
day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice day
Bye.
now.
Bye.
Bye.